kind of place is this?
Now, I was born in 1956, so I'm as old as rock and roll. Now, I've been doing my radio show for like nearly 20 years, and I figured I was pretty tooled up to musically juggle with the best of them. But I was thinking, how can I make this thing distinctly my own and it represent the culture clash of my journey?
Which way should I go?
That depends on where you want to go.
I'm Don Letts, aka The Rebel Dread, and this is my Late Night Tales.
Just want to get someplace, just keep going.
I wanted to work with Late Night Tales from the get-go. Such was the allure of their musical aesthetic. But as you all know, the Late Night Tales crew, they like to go that extra mile. For instance, they like to have exclusives, and they also like to feature a cover. So I came up with this idea of doing a Reggae Covers album. There's a long tradition of reggae covers, because for a lot of the brothers, when they couldn't write their own songs back in the days, the 50s and 60s, they do a cover version, like most bands do, until they can get their own shit together. But the Jamaicans made an art form out of this, and it naturally lent itself to these, what you call dub interpretations. Fast forward to where we are now, and I wanted to encapsulate their love of bass culture, Jamaica's gift to the world, and reflect the duality of my existence, which was black and British. And that's why you've got this culture clash of artists on this album. So growing up in the 60s and 70s, I got sort of reggae coming in one ear and dub, but in the other ear, I'm listening to what my white mates are being turned on by. And at that time, there was an explosion of things like the Kinks, the Who, the Stones, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin. And guess what? I'm feeling that too. And I'd like to think that this comp reflects that culture clash of my journey that's brought me to where I am today. So, kicking off this selection, Ghetto Priest with a bass-heavy version of an Aaron Neville classic, Hercules. And this one caught my attention because I noticed it was put together by engineer, producer, DJ and good friend Ashley Beadle. And I thought, okay, let me just try and give him a call and see if they'll do an exclusive for Late Night Tales. Rung him up, mentioned the record company, boom, he was good to go. Now, the original of this was Big Audio Dynamite's first chart hit, and the first song I wrote with Mick Jones, so I'm immensely proud of it. It's a homage to Nick Rogue, and this dubbed out version was actually suggested by the Anglo-Italian engineer, producer and musician Gaudi. And to complete the cast, I brought in a young singer called Emily Capel, a solo artist, currently working a bit with Dreadzone actually. And between Gaudi, the Rebel Dread and Emily, I think we delivered, something that Mick could be proud of. So who doesn't love this post-punk classic that was actually a hit after Ian took his life? I was particularly taken by this bass-heavy interpretation. No disrespect, Mr. Hook. But the icing on the cake for me was hearing the dulcet tones of Earl 16, a man with some serious Jamaican musical history under his belt. You know, going all the way back to Coxsone Studio 1. Quantic, aka Will Holland, another artist I discovered trying to source stuff for my radio show, new stuff to turn people onto. And I heard this a couple of years ago, his version of what I thought was a Stevie Wonder tune, but it was actually done before by Tammy Terrell in the 60s. But anyway, this dubbed out interpretation just lent itself perfectly to this compilation, man. Now, I've got to be honest, I didn't even know this was a Lou Rawls cover. But the dub version of You'll Never Find, one of my all-time favourites. And again, going with the whole Late Night Tales ethos, I thought, okay, how can I make this exclusive? I ring up Trojan Records. Have you got the parts? They laugh at me because, again, it's recorded back in the day when it was all bounced down to one track. Luckily for me, the Late Night Tales crew revealed their secret weapon, the stem machine. And with the appliance of science, we were able to take the original track and separate all the parts. And then I thought, okay, who would I like to sprinkle some magic on this? So I called up a dear friend, Mad Professor. And lucky for me, it was one of his favourite tracks too. Man, where do you start with engineer producer Dennis Bovell, bass master general, responsible for kickstarting lovers rock in the UK, and creating one of the UK's very first reggae bands, Matumbi, who actually recorded this cover of Kool and the Gang's Funky Stuff. And what a lot of people don't realise is, you know, as much as reggae was capturing our imagination back in the day, so was the soul and funk coming from America. And you couldn't get a better tune to move you on the dance floor than Kool and the Gang's Funky Stuff. So it lent itself perfectly to a bass-heavy interpretation from the brothers.
Rockets, moonshots.
A dubbed-out version of a track from one of the greatest albums of all time. 50 years old this year, and I'm talking about Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. How could I resist dubbing that up? And here's the thing, got another veteran of reggae vocals on it as well, Cornell Campbell, who's got a similar kind of history to Earl 16, you know, having recorded with all the great legendary Jamaican producers, and he's still recording to this very day. And this song, well, the whole album, you know, unfortunately remains as relevant as it did when it was made. So the popular version of 1977, it was all about punk rock, right? But here's the thing, the number one record at the end of the year was actually Saturday Night Fever. And this was actually written for Saturday Night Fever, but never used. You know, it's penned by the Bee Gees, and I guess it was the vocals and the harmonies that caught Dennis Bovell's ear, because he was moved to do a sort of lovers rock version of it. And it became a kind of classic of the scene, it has to be said. You know, it was done by these three very young girls who were actually called 15, 16 and 17. You work it out. I actually still own the 12-inch to this very day, and I can't tell you how buzzed I was to get the opportunity to revisit it with the man that originally made it and provide another exclusive for Late Night Tales. And Dennis was pretty buzzed too.
There's nothing like
Ash Walker's another artist that appeared on my radar via my radio show with his sort of dubbed out jazzy productions. And lucky for me, he had a connection with Late Night Tales anyway. He was working on an interpretation of Omar's There's Nothing Like This. Double lucky for me, Late Night Tales also had a hookup with Scientist, the producer engineer extraordinaire that was actually a protege of King Tubby. Another exclusive in the bag. To complete my selection, the dubbed out trio from Texas, Krang, a group I like so much that in my capacity as a radio broadcaster, I picked their 2018 album Con Todo El Mundo as my album of the year. And I couldn't have asked for a better way to end my set than a 21st century remix of Dern Carla. Okay, before I leave you, I've got to point out one other thing. Late Night Tales has kind of built its reputation on creating the ultimate late night mix. But here's the thing. Given the right circumstances, that late night vibe can transport you to any time of the day, man. Because it's about where your head's at, not the hands of your clock.